As promised in my last video, I mentioned a few far realm creatures which tend to show up in truly apocalyptic environments, such as when demons are about to pull a section of the prime material plane into the abyss. Because they have damaged and corrupted the laws of physics and magic so much, they've managed to shift the entire place into another dimension, a living dimension of chaos and evil. Apocalyptic environments is something not really covered that well by D&D. Sure, the layers of the abyss are very, very nasty and can seem a lot like an apocalyptic environment, but they're mostly stable. A true apocalyptic environment is absolutely not. It's in the process of being destroyed. Over the next few months, I'll be describing such places and providing a lot of resources for you to run games where your stories can venture into such nightmare scenarios for your players. Also, a new exploration super series is on the way, covering astral dominions in a whole new way, but today it's time to talk about the Wystes. Wystes appear as 25-foot long, 7.6 meters, and 2 feet wide, 0.61 meters, translucent worms full of weird undulating organs. They have a sucker mouth at one end, surrounded by clawed-tipped tentacles that are deceptively fast, highly territorial swarm feeders that dwell in noxious blue fluid, highly toxic and violently mutagenic. Do not get that crap on you. Wystes come to us from the fantastic bot set called The Gates of Firestorm Peak, which is packed full of creepy, violent, and mutated far realm creatures such as gibberlings who carry their offspring under their skin like squirming parasites, but also a self-contained little ecosystem which has since spread across the prime material plane. You may encounter some clusters of strange blobs, bulbs, and vivid blue goo originally brought into the world through a vast interdimensional gateway, forced open by a monomaniacal alienist wizard in their profane sanctum. The spongy black bulbs are vegetative, rooted in the stone ceiling with tough fibrous anchors. They draw sustenance directly from the minerals in the stone, weakening the material slowly, leading to future cave-ins. Among these black lumps are also white lumps, which slowly move about and feed on the black bulbs, producing a blue gooey byproduct that leaks out of sucker pores on their fleshy surface. The white creatures are more like a sea sponge. Their exterior is leathery on the surface and slimy where the blue goo oozes out constantly. Its feet are like stubby starfish legs. Adhesive suckers probe out from their gelatinous interior. They don't seem to have any mouth parts. Below the slowly moving white blobs and the black lumps clinging to the rock pock-marked surface, the vivid blue goo coats the floor of the chamber, and all the excess goo slowly drains into a huge pool. The great goo reservoir is approximately 80 feet deep before it narrows to cracks so small that only the goo itself can seep downward. At some point in the not-too-distant future, the slime will break into the caverns of the Underdark. The bulbs, lumps, and goo pose no overt threat to curious player characters unless one of them licks or eats any sample of these organisms. The character must immediately make a DC 16 Constitution saving throw or become poisoned. And while poisoned, they lose 3d4 hit points per round until they either make a saving throw or die from acute gastritis. The goo itself is not dangerous to the touch short term, just sticky and annoying. Anyone fighting while standing in the sludge must make a DC 12 dexterity check with a +2 bonus to the roll each round as they get used to it, or slip and fall face first into the muck. Within this blue goo lives a vicious nest of enormous lurking alien worms. The Wystes only surface occasionally as they don't need to breathe. They have a lamprey-like maw surrounded by large claw and maw-tipped cilia. The cilia not only allow the Wyste to sense its environment and feed itself, they also provide defense against other far realm entities who fancy the Wystes for a tasty treat. But we will get to the top of the food chain in the form of the horrific Dharculus in a moment. Prolonged exposure to the blue goop liquid is dangerous. Even being in near proximity to it for a long time can have a mutagenic effect on living creatures. This can result in children born with the potential to become sorcerers, of course, but also result in generations of slowly degrading features so that humanity slowly slips away, leaving more bestial and warped creatures. Wystes remain undetected if undisturbed, but breaking the surface of their domain will trigger an aggressive leaping attack where the huge worms burst 15 feet out of the muck. Their stats and basic attacks are quite similar to a Remora's, except they don't use heat for attacks, and they're unlikely to spit acid. Wystes can use their body to entangle another creature within 10 feet of the edge of the blue liquid pool. Any grappled victim is dragged under the surface of the blue goop on the following round, where they must contend with multiple Wystes, all snapping into them and dragging them down to probable suffocation, unless they make a saving throw and make it back to the surface. The goo is completely opaque, and the distortion effects of the field of corruption make it difficult for submerged characters to tell which way is up. A successful strength swimming proficiency check means a character can make it back to the surface of the viscous muck, or they may very well thresh about, losing precious oxygen and at severe risk of swallowing a deadly mouthful of the toxic blue sludge before they make it to the surface and gasping lungfuls of air. I think the Wystes are best described much like a horrific worm-like creature seen in Peter Jackson's King Kong movie. They really just exist to feed and don't suffer from fear or doubt, attacking any creature that disturbs their pond. Now, I did mention that they have a natural predator. Well, there's nothing natural about the dreaded and mysterious Dharculus. These creatures are known to cluster near the unstable gateway to the farm realm they originally crossed over from, feeding as much on the weird energy of that place as anything else. But they are hunters of the border ethereal plane and can range far and wide in search of prey. If you happen to encounter a swarm of eel-like creatures swimming through the air like a deadly school of predatory fish, what you are looking at is just part of the body of one creature. To those who can see into the ethereal, the eels are merely the protruding tentacle tips of the Dharculus, a massive, horrific monster that will absolutely eat your character if given the chance. So listen closely, this may save your character's life. The main body of the Dharculus seems to be made of fused and braided flesh, forming thick, ridged worm-like parts, with the rear half of the body arched and arranged more like a stinging wasp's rear end, curved back over the top of itself to form a stinger at the front. Most of the time, a character will not be able to see the main body of the creature, except when it manages to ensnare and draw prey back to its huge drooling maw, filled with razor-sharp teeth. Not all its projecting tentacles are used for eating. Some of them end in eyeballs, more or less. They keep the sensory organs safely retracted into the ethereal plane to keep them from being harmed during hunting or feeding. The hunting tentacles eels latch onto victims and inflict 1d4 slashing damage each round that they are biting into a victim and dragging them into the ethereal. A character can likely tear one of the tentacles free if they pull hard and can stand the pain, but multiple eel tentacles can reduce any chance of escape through brute force. If the Dharculus manages to hit with 3 tentacle attacks on one medium-sized or smaller creature, they will draw that victim into the border ethereal next round, where the victim takes... If the Dharculus manages to hit with 3 tentacle attacks on one medium-sized or smaller creature, they'll draw that victim into the border ethereal next round, where the victim starts to take 2d10 piercing damage per round from that huge maw attempting to feed on them. As always, remember, a tentacle can be torn free or shoved, but both cases will see it withdrawn back into the ethereal plane, and it takes 4 whole rounds for the Dharculus to reinsert a part of its body back into our reality. Being located mostly on the border ethereal is a gnarly defensive tactic for sure, but adventurers can figure out how to defeat them. A victim who is drawn through the veil has an opportunity to attack the Dharculus as it attempts to quickly kill the prey with its devastating bite, during which time the victim is half in and half out of the border ethereal, as it takes 4 rounds for them to fully cross over, after which they will need to find an alternative path back to the prime material plane or remain drifting in the border ethereal for quite some time, perhaps eventually dying from something else and passing into the deep ethereal and into the afterlife. Dragging oneself out of the border ethereal while partly submerged in it is like pulling oneself free of quicksand, requiring a strength saving throw at a difficult class appropriate for the level of the encounter. In combat, it's easier to treat the maw tentacles as separate creatures that simply get lopped off as they run out of hit points. The lost tentacles will regrow via regeneration. It takes about a day to completely regrow a limb, and the Dharculus will never insert a partially regrown limb into the material plane during hunting or feeding. Like pretty much all aberrations from the distant and twisted dimensions having an utterly alien psychology, their intentions and motivations are just madness. They make no real sense to us, but these creatures are fairly clearly motivated by some desire to feed, to gorge themselves endlessly on any flesh that they find. Anything that they can't eat immediately, they will simply disable viciously through a grim very grim injury, then leave the morsel sitting in the boreal ethereal plane suffering perfectly preserved for later feasting. Only one or perhaps two of these creatures are even known to have crossed over into our reality, and these exist only within Firestorm Peak so far. It's not to say that more do not exist within the Far Realm. As time passes, it seems inevitable that more will arrive, hunting the beaches of the prime material in relatively safe conditions from the shallow border of the ethereal. Considering that these creatures reproduce by asexual budding, just one turning up on any particular planet is a disaster in the making that can lead to the extermination of all other forms of life. Much like demonic incursions, the places where the far realms break through and mix with other realities is never good. The consequences are always long-term and rather dire, resulting in twisted forms of life, suffering, madness, and the increase of dangerously unleashed psychic power. Sadly, the place is a path to a certain kind of power, and it draws in maniacs with an insane lust for power, like moths to a flame. Most schools of magic take the protection of mortal reality very seriously, and the schools of divination, abjuration, and the mind are constantly on the watch for any disturbances in the normal flow of reality. The incursions of the Far Realm typically have a very strong psychic element to them, as stupendously mighty elder evils dwell in far-off dimensional frequencies. Not separated by physical space, that's not how dimensions work. Rather, these elder evils nest in the forgotten AM radio stations of the multiverse, while the multiverse carries on obliviously in the new fancy FM stations. Oh, so easily forgetting that the powers that made and can unmake reality are merely sleeping away the eons, and if they truly awaken, absolute chaos and mayhem will be the result. And with that charming thought, I'll leave you to your day or evening. As always, thanks for joining me, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.